This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good to meet everyone. Good evening. Bershus Rabbi Harris Shlita. All questions should be addressed to Rabbi Harris after the Shiur. So actually this Shiur started off as the 10 steps to raise successful children, and then I realized I was competing against the dinner, so I narrowed it down to 7. Be'ez Hashem, in future years we could b'chavakuk v'himidu alachas. I want to share with you 7 ideas. The first idea I think is pretty revolutionary, but when you examine the sources, I think it's a pretty very well documented traditional idea in Jewish child rearing, and it may come as a surprise to many, but nevertheless, let's try to study some of the classic sources on the subject of parenting. Now obviously, when it comes to parenting, you need a large, healthy dose of common sense, which, as they say, is not so common. But nevertheless, as all subjects require study and analysis, chinuch habanim should be no less. You know, we're very quick to go to self-help books and listen to what modern science tells us about psychology or child rearing, and sometimes we overlook that the Torah Seinu HaKadosha, which is obviously a Torah's Chaim, has a lot to say about the proper way to raise our children. So let's go back all the way to the beginning, and I want to bring to your attention a discrepancy between the way Yaakov Avinu spoke to his father and the way Esav spoke to his father, and this is very surprising. We know that Yitzchak was blind, and he was supposed to be giving the brachos to who he thought was Esav, and he told Esav, Kachali Shnei Gedoy Yizim. That's why tonight's dinner was to commemorate the first Paschal lamb that was served by supposedly Esav to Yitzchak Avinu, but of course Yaakov Avinu goes in, and Yitzchak recognizes right away there's something very fishy over here. The way the individual standing before him spoke was not the way Esav typically spoke. So the first thing that piqued the curiosity of Yitzchak, that sort of threw him off, is that the individual standing before him invoked the name of Hashem. He said, Ki hikra Hashem Elokecha lefanai. So Yitzchak says, Geshana v'amushcha, let me feel who this is. Rashi points out, Esav did not typically invoke the name of Hashem. And then Rashi points out on the pasuk, Hakoil kol Yaakov hayadayim yedei Esav, that we know Yaakov Avinu spoke courteously. Yaakov Avinu would say no, Yaakov Avinu would say please. Esav would never say please, and the person standing before him said, Kum na, please get up. So Yitzchak says to himself, is this Esav? Esav all of a sudden is saying please? So these are the 2 discrepancies that we're all familiar with. We know that Yaakov Avinu said please, Esav didn't typically say please. Yaakov Avinu invokes the name of Hashem, Esav doesn't usually invoke the name of Hashem. But there's another amazing difference between the way Yaakov Avinu spoke to his father and the way Yitzchak spoke to his father. And this difference is picked up by none other than the great Rebbe, the Chassam Sofer of Nosson Adler. The Nesher Hagadol. Rav Nosson Adler was a very controversial figure. He had to run away from his community. He was involved in many Kabbalistic practices that were not accepted by his Kehillah, but the Chassam Sofer stood by him through thick and thin. Chassam Sofer writes that he did not pull his hand away from his Rebbe's hand in all of his Rebbe's exiles. Chassam Sofer, the Rav Nosson Adler writes, there's a major difference between the way Yaakov spoke to his father and the way Esav spoke to his father. And that is, Yaakov spoke to his father second person. Kum na, get up please. Second person, like I talk to you, you talk to me. Second person. And Esav speaks to his father third person, like maybe you speak to a Rebbe. Yakum Avi, will the Tata get up? And at first glance it would seem that Esav is displaying much greater kibud av to his father than Yaakov. Yaakov speaking to his father like he would be his friend. And Esav speaks to him like he'd be a Rosh Hashiva, Yaakov Avi. Says Rav Nosson Adler, this is the difference between Jews and Gentiles. Gentiles speak to their father third person. Jews speak to their father second person. This is the tradition in the Jewish people. Nosson Adler doesn't explain. Why would that be? Why would Gentiles seemingly display greater courtesy, greater honor to their father than Jews do? Comes the Chassam Sofer, and the Chassam Sofer says that the Rebbe explained that there's a big difference between the relationship of father and child by the nations of the world as opposed to the Jewish people. By the nations of the world, there's, so to speak, there's a generation gap. There's a disparity, there's a distance between father and son. So the son approaches the father from a distance. So the son says, Yaakov Avi, third person. Says the Chassam Sofer, not so by the Jewish people. The Jewish people speak to their father the way we speak to the Ribbono Shel Olam. Ata, you, second person, directly, because there's a deveikos, there's a connection. There's a korva, there's a closeness. There's an ahava. We have a concept, bra mezaka abba, bra kara da'avuha. And because of that closeness, because of that connection, we don't allow ourselves to speak to the parent in third person. Instead, we speak to the parent second person. So that's already an eye-opening comment. It's a surprising comment. If I were to ask you, what is the job description of a parent? How do you define the role of father? How do you define the role of mother? Say, I don't know, role model, authority figure, teacher, guide, leader. Let's try to examine a pasuk in the Chumash. And this is an observation of Reb Shimon Schwab. And this is an observation we're going to see in Rashi throughout Chamisha Chumshei Torah. We have a pasuk in Parsha Re'eh. Parsha Re'eh discusses what is known as perhaps the worst aveira in the Torah, the mesis, the seducer. So if you look in Amreid, Ki yisischa achicha, if your brother will seduce you, ben imecha, be he the son of your mother, ay bincha, ay bitecha, your son, your daughter, even if your son seduces you, even if your daughter seduces you, or your wife, or your soul friend. Interesting individual. There is a person in this world that the Torah refers to as not just re'acha, your friend, re'acha asher kenavshecha, your friend that's like your soul. You know, your best man, your best friend in this world. Who is this guy? Who is Re'acha Asher Kenavshecha? Says Rashi, Ze Avicha. Rashi says that's your father. That's your mother. That's your parent. How does the Torah describe a parent? The description of parent, the job description is Ze Avicha, this is your father. Say, I don't know. Rashi, maybe it's a drasha. Who else does it refer to? It doesn't mean that that's the definition of a father. Okay, so we need to corroborate this viewpoint that a father is supposed to be the closest friend that a child has in this world. Let's take a look at another pasuk in Chumash. So Paro has these dreams. Nobody could interpret the dreams. And they tell Paro, there's a man in the dungeon. He's expert in interpreting dreams. So they yank him out of the prison. And they bring Yosef to Paro. And Yosef interprets the dream. And we know the rest is history. And the brothers are looking for Yosef. And the brothers have nothing to eat. And finally Yosef reveals himself to his family. And they're getting nervous. Chazal say they started to back away. At first they were going to try to kill Yosef. And the pasuk says Yosef tries to calm the brothers down. He says, "V'ata lo yatem shalachtem osihena." You didn't send me here. Ki ho Elokim, God sent me here. And you know what my role here is? Vayasimeni le'av le'paroi. I'm Paro's av. I'm Paro's parent. So Rashi says, what? I'm Paro's parent? How is Yosef Paro's parent? He's maybe an advisor. Maybe, why would Yosef use the word av? You ready for a Rashi? Zokt Rashi la'av lechover ulepatroin. Lechover ulepatroin. What's a father? Your friend, your supporter. So I said, okay, well, Rashi has to explain the simple meaning of the pasuk. Is Rashi really defining for us that the definition of a father is a friend? Comes Reb Shimon Schwab. He has nimukim at the end of each parsha. Reb Schwab writes that from Rashi we see that the Das Torah, the Torah's definition of parent is your friend. That is the definition of parenthood. Reb Schwab cites the Rashi in Re'eh, Re'ach Asher Kenavshecha, meaning the definition of father is best friend. So if you pay your kids tuition and you make sure they come to Shachris and you learn with them and you take responsibility for all of their affairs in life, but when it comes to a relationship, you're not their friend. So are you fulfilling the description of father? Reb Schwab says no. You did a lot of good things, but you're not fulfilling your role as av ve'em. Av ve'em means chaver upatrain. Who says this? Rashi. Rashi, by the way, was an Orthodox rabbi. So was Reb Shimon Schwab. Rashi says this throughout Chamishei Chumshei Torah. The definition of Av is Chaver. So it's interesting. You have Rashi's. Chassam Sofer seems to be saying a very similar type of thing. That the relationship of parenting among the Jewish people is fundamentally different than parenting by the Gentiles, by the nations of the world. But let's take this even further. There's another Rashi, Parshas Vayetze. Rashi says, Vayomer Yaakov le'echav. Yaakov tells his brothers, remember the story? Lavan runs after Yaakov Avinu, and finally on the seventh day, Lavan catches up with Yaakov Avinu. And they're having this meal on the mountaintop, so they need to gather stones. So Yaakov Avinu says, he calls his brothers, Vayomer Yaakov le'echav. Yaakov says to his brothers. So Rashi's brother, what do you mean Yaakov says to his brothers? Yaakov doesn't have brothers. He has one brother, Esav, and Yaakov's not calling Esav to schlep stones. Says Rashi, Le'echav, Haim Banav. Who are Yaakov's brothers? His children. His children. Okay, so Rashi seems to be saying that Yaakov Avinu had a relationship of brotherhood with his children. Say, no, that's not what Rashi means. Rashi just has to identify who these people are. Who else could they be other than his children? Comes the Chida. The Chida wrote a commentary on the Sefer Chasidim. Comes the Chida, and the Chida quotes Rashi. You ready for the Chida? The Chida was also an Orthodox rabbi. And the Chida did not live in the 21st century, he didn't live in the 20th century. Chida lives 200 years ago. Says the Chida, Lamadnu sheyakov avinu alav shalom hayamachshiv as banav ke'echav. Yaakov treated his children like his brothers. Not like his inferiors. Yaakov didn't consider himself authority. Yaakov treated his children like his brothers. Says the Chida, what should we do? V'chein ro'oi la'av sheyachshiv banav. Now, gedolim, not talking about kids in kindergarten, not talking about 5-year-olds, talking about teenagers, adult children. V'chein ro'oi la'av sheyachshiv banav gedolim ki'ilu heim echav. Treat your children as if they're your brothers. Ask their opinion. Treat them like they're your friend. Treat them like, you're friendly with each other. You're on equal footing. They know they're not on equal footing. You know they're not on equal footing. But treat them as if they are. Says the Chidah, you don't have to listen to my advice, only if you want to have peace in your house. Then things will be calm and tranquil. And then the Chidah says, don't take my word for it. There's a sefer called Sefer Hasidim. Now, Sefer Hasidim is probably the most strict of the Chachmei Ashkenaz. Okay, so you're not going to expect to find these type of ideas in the Sefer Hasidim. No, it says the Sefer Hasidim. He brings the Gematria. Hinei matoiv umanoim sheves achim gam yochad. Achim gam is Gematria banim, says the Sefer Hasidim. To teach this idea that the Chidah is deriving from Rashi, namely, that if you want to have peace in your household, the type of relationship you want to cultivate with your children. Again, it's talking about adult children, teenagers, and it certainly requires study and analysis. What is the exact age and how it applies? But it's a certain approach. The approach is that one should treat their children like your brothers. Who says that? Rashi, Chidah, Chassam Sofer, and somebody showed me very recently in the Kol Kisvei Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim's son writes that when he would walk with his father in the street, the way his father was noheg with him, people thought they were achim mamish. These are the words of the son of the Chafetz Chaim. So that's sort of an eye-opening perspective. I don't think this is something we would have expected to find in Chassam Sofer, in the Chidah, in Reb Schwab, in the Chidah. You would have expected this is like a new vogue, new approach, 21st century approach to chinuch. This is the traditional, age-old hashkafas haTorah of how a parent should try to cultivate a relationship with his child. Let's take this to the next step. Another Rashi. It's not on the sheet. This is literally one of the most astounding things I ever saw. It's so astounding that in the second volume of the Sefer, they took out part of it. But I'm going to tell you what it said in the original volume. You could imagine why it was taken out. But the Iker Nakuda is definitely still in the second edition, and Emes V'Yatzev. Let's go to the Akedah. If you want to know how to raise a child, you could expect that. Let's study, what did Avraham Avinu do? You know, he's the first person who was able to raise a Gadol b'Yisrael. So, is there anything we could learn from the Hanhaga of Avraham Avinu, how he was able to produce a Yitzchak Avinu? Now, it's interesting. I don't think we find too many words that took place between Abraham and Yitzchak in the whole Torah. I think maybe Abraham only said to Yitzchak 2 words in the Chumash. I mean, do you remember any conversations between Abraham and Yitzchak? There's a very brief conversation that's recorded in the Akedah. But let's go to the beginning of the Akedah. Vayihi achar hadvarim ha'ela v'ha Elokim nisa es Avraham. God tests Abraham. Vayomer elav Avraham. You ready, Avraham? What does Avraham say? 1 word. Vayomer hineni. Okay, hineni. Avraham and Yitzchak are going to the Akedah. Now, by the way, what does hineni mean? Hineni means, Rashi says, Kachi aniyasam shel chasidim. It's not on your sheet. Lashon anavahu. The lashon zimun. It's a lashon of humility, a lashon of being prepared to fulfill one's bidding. So Avraham and Yitzchak are going to the Akedah, and Yitzchak has a little bit of an intuition that something is might be a little uncomfortable for him. Yitzchak is getting a little bit of an intuition that there's something unusual taking place here. Vayomer Yitzchak el Avraham aviv, vayomer avi. Tata, what's going on? And I think this is the only conversation in the Chumash between Avraham and Yitzchak. Vayomer hineni b'ni. Hineni. Behold, here I am. What? Didn't Avraham just say that word to the Almighty? Doesn't Rashi say hineni means lashon anivus, lashon of humility? And now Avraham goes and turns around and he talks to Yitzchak with the same humility that he spoke to the Borei Olam? The same anivus, the same hineni? He just used that in talking to the Almighty. And now Avraham Avinu turns around, and as far as I think, this is one of the only, if not the only words Avraham says to Yitzchak in Torah Shebachsav. Lashon Anava. Says Rav Gamliel Rabinovich, from here we learn that with the same anivus that you speak to the Borei Olam, you should speak to your children. Says Rav Gamliel Rabinovich, you could say what you want. He says he spends a good chunk of his day dealing with youth at risk. He says the overwhelming majority of the time, it's because the parent doesn't speak to the child, b'derech kavod, b'derech anivas. And if you want to know why he says, in my opinion, Avram Avinu is able to produce a Yitzchak Avinu, it's because Avram Avinu had the anivus to speak to his son with the same humility that he spoke to the Almighty. And then Rav Gamliel writes something and they took it out of his book. I saw, because in the second volume, I couldn't believe it was in the first volume. It's almost heretical. But I assume you have to take it with many grains of salt and understand it in the context that he said it. And you could probably understand why they took it out of the book. But in Madura Aleph of the Sefer Tiv HaTorah, he says in the name of his mother that his mother would say, and my kids are laughing, I'm trying, I'm doing my best, right? His mother would say, if the Torah was written today, obviously that line itself is already, beyond the pale. But if the Torah was written today, it wouldn't say Kabed es avicha v'yasimecha, it would say Kabed es bincha v'yasbitecha. And they took it out of the book, probably for a good reason, for many good reasons. And really I shouldn't say it over, and it's keilu I didn't say it. It should be hefker ka'afra da'ara. It's batal u'mavutal. I never said it, you never heard it, we'll take it off the tape. But if there was a first edition, and that's what it said, then that's what it said. But it's really an amazing observation from Rashi. And if we have one conversation in the Torah between Avraham and Yitzchak, and that conversation is Hineni B'ni, then that's sort of all we need to know about Chinuch Habanim. Hineni B'ni. Next idea. So that's number one. Number one, to try to cultivate a relationship of friendship with one's child. Number two, to try to develop speaking to one's child, b'derech anivos, b'derech kavod, to show them that you value them. Number three, okay, so you want to speak to your children about the importance of Lashon Hara. You want to speak to them about the importance of not wasting time, of Bein Adam Lachaveroi. Okay, so you're gonna bring some Parsha sheet to the table, and you're gonna read. In this week's Parsha, we learned the lesson that you should try to be careful. Don't even bother. If you're just reading a Parsha sheet to them, if you're just repeating over Dvar Torah, and you're saying it mesafa ulachutz, then it's not going to have any impact on them. The Al-Shech HaKadosh writes famously, V'hayu hadvarim ha'ela asher anoichi mitzavcha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha. If you want to convey something to your child, it better be on your heart. You better mean it. You better feel something about it. You better be passionate about it. But if it's just something you're repeating, oh, my Rebbe told me this, so I'm telling it to you. Doesn't mean anything to me? No. Am I saying it with any kind of feeling, emotion? Is it really important to me? No, I'm just telling it to you. Don't even bother. Says the Al-Shech HaKadosh, the level of impact, and this is not only for parents, for teachers, for Abbeim, the level of impact that something has on the recipient is directly proportional to its meaning to the one conveying it. If it's meaningless to you, if it's on your lips, it will bounce off the other person's eardrums. But if it's on the heart of the noisein, then it will enter the heart of the makabel. It has to be dvarim hayotzim min alev. You want to give over something to your children, you better mean it yourself. It better be meaningful to you, right? Today the buzzword is meaningful. Everything is meaningful. I can't take it, right? Have a meaningful Shabbos. You wish me have a good Shabbos. If it's going to be meaningful, I'll decide whether it's going to be meaningful. Have a meaningful fast. None of your business whether I'm going to have a meaningful fast or not. You tell me have an easy fast. As far as you're concerned, I should have an easy fast. If I'm going to have a meaningful fast, I'll decide what. But everything has to be meaningful today. Well, if you want to have an impact on somebody else, it better be meaningful to you. Number 4. This is just a simple chizkuni. Nobody's listening to a word you say. You could give speeches, shiurim, divrei Torah. Nobody's listening. Don't kid yourself that you're going to say something at them and they're going to actually listen to you. This is amazing chizkuni. I heard this from Yonason Sachs, Rav in Pesach. Just a simple chizkuni. Chizkuni wants to know what was wrong with the original system where the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash was performed by the Bechayrim. Yeah, that was the original system. Firstborn does the avodah. And next generation, firstborn does the avodah. What was wrong with that system? So the Chizkuni writes there was a problem with that system. It was a faulty system. The problem was that if I'm a Bechar and my dad is not a Bechar, so my father's going to say, kid, I don't know how to do the avodah. Here, let me write down on the blackboard. A, okay, go in. B, go into the mikvah. C, put right foot first. He said, Dad, but you don't do that. You don't go to the mikvah. You don't put the right. Yeah, but I'm not a Bechar. So the kid is already handicapped because he's hearing what he should do, but he's not learning by personal example. So Hashem had to switch the system. Basically, the only system that's going to work is the system of lineage, where the Levi doesn't have to hear something in the classroom, but he's able to learn by personal example. So his grandfather was a Levi, and the father was a Levi, so the kid has a fighting shot to do what he needs to do, because he's not learning information, he's not learning what he's taught, he's learning what he sees. He's learning by personal example. Personal example will stick, it will be effective, it will be transmitted to the next generation. So if you want to teach something to your kid, it's not so much about what you tell them, but how you are yourself. And then Rav Pam has a bigger chiddush. Now this chiddush, I have to say, Rav Pam doesn't say there's a source in Chazal, but he says this from his personal life experience. They asked Rav Pam, how do you teach derech eretz to children? Rav Pam says, it's not something you teach. It's not even the kid is watching how you deal with other people. Rav Pam said, the kid is watching how you deal with them. Rav Pam would say that, everybody knows Rav Pam was once asked the question, somebody once came to Rav Pam, and he wanted to know whether you're allowed to say a strong word for be quiet. S-H-U-T-U-P. That was the shoyel wanted to know. He asked Rav Pam, are you allowed to say that? So they came to Rav Pam and they said, there's a certain word, it's not a klala, it's not a dirty word, but it's not so refined. Is one allowed to say it? Rav Pam said, what are you referring to? Tell me exactly what you mean. So the person was embarrassed to say, so Reb Pam said, you mean fres? You mean fres? Reb Pam said, no, you shouldn't say that. It's very coarse, it's not refined. So this is the type of sensitivity Reb Pam had. And he says he learned it from his mother. On a Friday, the mother asked the kids, could you set the Shabbos table? Could you help me out? And Reb Pam would say that his mother, she would ask the children so gently, so calmly, like they're doing her the biggest favor in the world. Shefala, would you mind kindly setting the table for the Shabbos? And then when they would do so, the mother would heap on them such brachos and how amazing they are, that the child naturally wants to emulate not the way the parent deals with anybody else other than the way the parent deals with themselves. That's number 5. The best way to teach your child is the way you interact with that child. Number 6, I once read a story, and every story in every book, of course, is obviously true, and it's mamish Torah misinai. I'm just joking, I don't believe any stories, but they're good to say over when you need to. And a story is like a mashal. If it could illustrate a point, then... But this story I think might be true. One of my favorite books is Tales Out of Shul. So there, Rabbi Emanuel Feldman writes that he remembers when he was a little kid, his father would be learning at the Shabbos table, and he would come down Shabbos morning, and his father would say to him, Mendel, this is azoy geschmack, is azoy geschmack. The Gemara, it's so enjoyable. And a father like that, you see, he produced great personalities in the Jewish people. There's a very beautiful and powerful lavush. The Gemara says in many places, Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, Nedarim, Mibnei Ma'av de Haaretz, why was the land of Israel destroyed? Shalai berchu b'Torah tchila. They didn't make berachas haTorah. Question is, what do you mean? The Gemara says in Yuma, the first place when Israel was destroyed, Avodah Zarah, Gilui Araya, Shvichas Damim. What does it have to do with the fact that they didn't make berachas haTorah? So the Lavush says like this, a very important Lavush. I understand why the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. The Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because of the big 3, the cardinal 3, Avodah Zarah, Gilui Araya, Shvichas Damim. Mibnei Ma'av de Haaretz was what happened to the children in the next generation. Where are the Talmidei Chachamim? That's the question of the Haaretz. And the answer is, they didn't make Berachas HaTorah. Says the Lavush, what's Berachas HaTorah? Berachas HaTorah is not a bracha like a bracha on a shofar, a bracha on a lulav, a bracha on tzitzis. Berachas HaTorah is like a bracha on Snapple. It's like a bracha on pizza. It's Birchas HaNehenin. You know why we make a bracha on the Torah? Because you make a bracha every time you get enjoyment in this world. A parent, a father, a mother that makes a Birchas HaTorah because he's teaching his child that there's nothing more enjoyable, nothing that brings greater satisfaction, happiness, than Limud HaTorah, than Asiyas HaMitzvos. The worst thing you could do is, Dad, where are you going tonight? I'm going to Shiur. But Dad, you're so tired. Yeah, but just like the Jews in Auschwitz, in Dachau, they were moiser nefesh al kiddush Hashem to learn Torah. I'm going out to a Shiur just like they did 70 years ago. I'm giving up on myself. The kid says, yeah. So I'm not interested in that. You could be moiser nefesh. I'm not interested in mesiras nefesh. You don't want your kid to think you're being moiser nefesh. You want him to think that what you're doing is the greatest joy and happiness and most meaningful thing you could possibly do in this world. Mibnei ma'av de haaretz, shaloi berchu Torah tchila, that they treated Torah like a hana in this world. Okay, here's the grand finale. We'll have to give the executive summary of number 7. This is one of my all-time favorite stories. So they came to the stipler. Somebody came to the stipler and said, Stipler going, please give us a bracha for hatzlacha and raising our children. We want to have children. Yirei shamayim, balei midos toivos. So the stipler said, there are no brachas, there are no segulais. What time now? 90-second. Okay. There are no brachas, there are no segulais. All there is tefillah. Tefillah, tefillah, tefillah. The stipler said, you see Chayimul over here? Every day I daven that Chayimul should be a Yirei Shamayim, should be a Loimei Torah. Chayimul was already 52 years old, one of the Gedolei Hadar. When Reb Chaim Kanievsky was 58 years old, one day after Mincha, Reb Chaim was waiting for the stipler, and the stipler was davening Mincha, an extra 15 minutes. He was Yorei Demois. Reb Chaim said, what's wrong, Tati? Why are you crying? The stipler said, I heard that you have a Seder every day after Mincha, and that today you're not going to keep your Seder because you're going to the wedding of a Yasaim v'Yasaima, and I'm afraid you're regressing. So I was crying because I said, Ribbon Shem, I've been Yorei Demois for 58 years that my son should be Yirei Shamayim and he should go Mala Mala, and I have a little bit of a sense that maybe you're having a Yerida. So it hurt me so terribly. That's why I was davening extra today. Says the Medrash, the Iker ingredient in raising good children is tefillah, tefillah, tefillah. Lashon of the Mishnah Berurah, La'olam yehi shagur b'fi av va'em tfilasam al habanim. Shagur means not just shachris, not just mincha, not just marav. Means when you're driving carpool, when you're going to the store. Throughout the day, the focus of a parent should be on the physical, emotional, and spiritual welfare of their children. Uvizchusa, we should all be zoicha to the nachas we hope for. We should all be zoicha banim of banim. Thank you very much.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.